this is, she they did a show at the Guggenheim in 2018 that was the attended by the most people that attended any exhibition at the Guggenheim. There were over 600,000 people that went through to see the show. Hilma of Klint was a remarkable artist that until about 1986, not many people had heard of. She was included in an exhibition at the LA Museum of Modern Art at that time called the Spiritual in Art, and they had I can't remember exactly, but I think they had about six of her paintings in the show, and people were knocked out by them. So I'm going to get started in earnest at this point. This exhibition is going to be very different from the exhibition that took place at the Guggenheim. Going to focus, for the most part, on her later work, which are a lot of these botanical pieces. I don't know if they're going to have any of the larger scale paintings for the temple included in this exhibition. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. May 11th is when it's opening. So I'm going to do a little thing. At this point, just fasten your seatbelts because we're going for a ride on the astral plane today. Hilma is quite a character. I want to make a little disclaimer before I get going. As an artist, I view the work and see its beauty and see the quality of what's there and the resonance that's in the work. But I'm not an art historian, not a theologian, not a psychologist. I can personally speak to the experience of being in an altered state when I'm in the act of creation. I don't know how much, I don't know too much about the neurological connections, but the right brain business is a very different space to be in than our normal day-to-day functioning out there in the world. And work. Hilma carried that to a very different place. This show at MoMA, from my understanding, is going to focus on the later work. Like I said, the botanical studies with these botanical studies have a twist. You see the little diagram at the bottom there. Basically, she was tracking or trying to note the life force of the plant life in these things. So there are notations all over these pieces and little diagrams. Okay, so I paint what I cannot see with my physical eyes. This is a quote from her. This large-scale project, Paintings for the Temple, a series of 193 paintings realized under the supposed guidance of spirits, of Klint deliberately stepped back as an independent creator, allowing the supernatural force or her subconscious, as the surrealists would say, to take control. paintings for the temple were um, pure data devoid of interpretation. They were accompanied by diaries in which Hilma attempted to systematize symbols and details. She insisted that her works were painted by her hand, but not by her, as she believed that she was channeling someone else's will. Okay, and the shot down below is the installation that was at the Guggenheim at the base. Okay. Hilma was born in 1682. Um, she participated in her first seances in 1879. Um, and she meets Anna Cassell, who would be a lifelong friend, acquaintance, fellow artist. Um, her sister, Hermina, dies at age 10 when I believe Hilma was 17 or 18 at that point. And that had a really profound effect on her. Um, I'm gonna step back for a moment and say that basically her father was a naval officer who taught. You see the Carlsberg Palace image that I've got back there. That's where she was born, and basically, her father was a mathematician, and basically the family there was a long naval history of basically map making, cartology, and all that, but very much involved with mathematics and science. Um, in 1882, she studies at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm. I'll say more about that a little bit later. Um, and she showed this conventional paint. Um, Basically, Andromeda at sea um, won a competition, and I'll talk more about that too. The interesting part was in most other European academies, women were not allowed in. Um, she was actually probably the second generation of women who were allowed to study at the academy in Sweden. Um, this was partially due to the fact that women could design, paint, and earn a bit of a living. So the family didn't have to support them if they turned out to be a single woman living out in the world. Um, so that was one of the motivating factors. But they also recognized her talent. Um, So she participated in group exhibitions, travels to Germany, Norway, Holland, Belgium, Italy. So she was well traveled and well educated. Hilma's art studies at the Royal Academy at age 20 required her to create works that were mostly traditional themes, portraits, botanical drawings, landscapes. But the whole time, her interest in the spiritual um, world was still going, from active, and she interacted with other people who were like-minded at the time. it's it's hard for us to know how pervasive something like spiritualism and theosophy were back in those days, but it was very big around the turn of the century. Um, okay, botanical drink over here. Born in the mid 19th century into the dynasty of marine officers and cartographers, from an early age, she expressed interest in natural science and drawing, inspired by cartographic drawings of her family members. Her family was rather supportive of her decision to become an artist. Sweden was one of the first countries to grant women the rights to obtain higher education, including art related degrees. However, despite the legal action, the everyday discrimination did not go away easily. In the opinion of many public figures, women artists were incapable of innovation and could only copy the styles and subject matter of men. Nuts. Um, Despite the stereotypes and institutional obstacles, Hilma af Klint finished her school and was awarded her personal studio in central Stockholm, which is quite a piece of business. That portrait I mean that large historic painting that I showed you a couple of slides ago was actually the piece that she won this prize prized location for. Uh, Anyway, for decades, she made a living by painting portraits and creating illustrations for botanical and zoological encyclopedias. Not all of her works have been identified throughout the years, since many of them remained unsigned. Illustration was her most publicized domain. Um, Yet, well, inspired by the explorations of the spiritual, Hilma started to create abstract art in her early 40s. However, her illustrations would play a surprisingly her non-figurative career. And in fact, this show is devoted to exploring the later work after the temple paintings into the botanical exploration in a very different way. Um, if anybody has any questions while I'm rattling all this stuff off, just put it in the chat and I'll try and get to it. Okay. And here's a self-portrait. You can see she's beautiful botanical. And here she is in her Stockholm studio. There's no doubt that Hilma considered the spiritual works first and foremost, the paintings for the temple, her most significant achievement. But it is important to point out that throughout her life, she returned to the more traditional kinds of painting taught by the Royal Academy. You could see here um, in these early works her skill with portraiture also. Okay, so Hilma's spiritual journey was greatly influenced by a group she called the Five, formed in 1896. This group consisted of Klint and four other women engaging in spiritual practices, seances, automatic writing sessions, and drawing to communicate with what they believed to be spiritual beings, which they called the high masters. Through these practices, Klimt developed her unique abstract visual language, paving way for her later, more famous work. So you can see here, that's Af Klimt, and that's her in process of actually doing one of these drawings. And you notice that she's looking out; she's not looking at the paper while she's doing this. So this business of automatic writing 20 years later is picked up by the surrealists and carried forward. They, you know, espouse automatic writing. Um, and so you can see a couple of these. Let's see. Much more. Uh, there is some discernible kind of script writing in there if you stretch your mind a little bit. But and then we've got a group doing a seance over here. Okay, so theosophy, it figures high on the list of things that affected her. Theosophy draws from a number of Western and Eastern religious philosophies, maintaining that a knowledge of God may be achieved through spiritual ecstasy, direct intuition, or special individual relations with a hierarchy of spirits or great masters. The movement was founded in 1875 as the Theosophical Society, excuse me, in America by Russian-born Helena Blavatsky and Henry Steele Alcott. Alcott. Um, Hilma's altarpiece number one from 1915 is a significant work within her Paintings for the Temple series and is part of a trio intended for the central part of the spiritual temple. The painting depicts ascension with the golden sun like circle overlaid with gold leaf by a rainbow hued triangle, leading the eye upward. It's believed to represent the theosophical concept of spiritual evolution, both ascending from the physical to the spiritual and descending from the divine to the material. Okay, and on the right, you see Blavatsky and Alcott, um, and the symbols of multiple religions. Um, I, I'm not espousing anything at this stage of the game, so but this was a very influential school of thought. In fact, both Mondrian and Kandinsky, and I believe Paul Klee, were all influenced by the thinking behind the Theosophy, Theosophical Society. Uh, Here we go. Okay. Okay. And here's a couple more automatic drawings from 1903. Um, you know, they say that she only started creating her abstract work in 1906, but in fact, these pieces would qualify as abstractions, in my opinion. Um, and to put the light of the notion that abstract painting and this kind of spiritual exploration was begun in the early 1900s. These paintings were painted by Georgiana Houghton in England in in the 1860s. And you can see that this is kind of a color version of the automatic writing idea. Uh, so I'm just, putting this out there. Okay. I paint what I cannot see with my physical eyes. She produced a series of 26 paintings called Primordial Chaos during between 1906 and 1907. Um, this work predates Kandinsky's abstraction by 4 years. It goes back further than that to 1903 with the guided sessions and non-representational drawings. Into abstraction, informed by the metaphysical question, what lies beyond form? As I said, she worked with this group of four other women in these explorations to basically um, there is some question also of whether she had assistance when she was painting the large scale pieces, but we're going to move on to these. The pictures were painted directly through me without any preliminary drawing and with great force. I had no idea what the paintings were supposed to depict. Nevertheless, I worked swiftly and surely without changing a single stroke. And these pieces are over 10 feet tall and just about 8 feet wide, each of them in this series of 10. And I picked out childhood and old age to juxtapose. Now, these paintings were painted in egg tempera on paper and then mounted on canvas. They actually lay in crates for, I would say, the number that comes to mind is at least 40 years, if not longer, in a after all that time. Uh, Her nephew inherited the work, but really didn't know what to do with it. He safeguarded it, but it 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 was not until 1969, I believe, or 64, that the crates were even opened and looked into. Okay. By 1915, F. Klint had finished 82 additional paintings to complete the set of 193 paintings for the temple. He had worked on since 1906. These later series include Tree of Knowledge, not on exhibit here. This is not the tree of knowledge. This is the 10 large ones. Um, More typical identities, the swan, the dove, the atom, and a wide range of symbols. These were intended to be displayed in a spiral temple that Klimt made a few sketches for in the 1930s, but was never able to complete. She would have loved the fact that her work was shown at the Guggenheim inside that spiral. We're talking about, again, we're back to that golden mean business that I've talked about in the past, that structure, that spiral, that shell. Um, the other thing which is really interesting is that Frank Lloyd Wright was also a theosophist, that he had studied this stuff too. So it's a really interesting coming together of elements for that Guggenheim show. Okay. In 1904, around the same time that okay, sorry guys, ran into a technical glitch. Okay. Can you guys still see the on screen? Let's see. You see me? Okay, good. All right. So I am gonna share my screen again. Okay. Uh, okay. Here we go. Um, can you see that now? Yes? Okay. Um, so these illustrations were something that she would have seen also and influenced her. You can see the kind of organic pod-like shapes and all that in her abstraction. Thought forms. A record of clairvoyant investigation um, is a theosophical book compiled by Annie Besant and uh, Ledbetter um, in 1905, although they had been lecturing on this from around 1900. So Hilma would have actually been exposed to these notions also. The idea is that uh, thoughts have form, that experiences, emotions, music all have um, uh, a image that can be associated with them. Now, again, I don't know, but um, whatever it is that stimulated Hilma to to create these paintings I'm all for that. Whatever it is. Okay. Ah, and the pictures were painted directly through me without any preliminary drawings with great force. Okay. So I worked swiftly, surely, without changing a single brushstroke. Um, Now, she may have worked on these with Annie Casal. Two of the other women that were in this group of five were also trained artists. Okay. So each one of these represents a series of pieces that she worked on. I believe there are at least seven in the series of the Dove. Okay, and this is the Tree of Knowledge. Um, yeah, this one I know there are seven in this series. Now, you see these kind of organic shapes. There's also correlations to the chakras and stuff like that going on here. Um, this is a very ancient, recurring image, and that was done in, let's see, uh, the series was finished around 1915. This was from Jung's exploration of the collective unconscious, um, systems of all worlds, 1916. Um, so, and then the two other pieces are kind of tree of life images from different cultures. This business of the collective unconscious and the parallels between Hilma's work and the exploration that Jung was involved in at that time is really fascinating. Oh, okay. And there are 24 in this series of the Swan. Um, they become more and more minimal as they go on. As you can see, number one is obviously, these are swan shapes and they're, interacting. Um, I've talked about this business of figure ground, and I'll talk more about it right now. But it goes from this really representational image to this very minimalist abstraction by the time you get up to number 17 in this series. And again, the business of figure ground, of the uniting of the male and the female, the balancing, the merging of which has been separated, the interaction, the union of opposites, um, was a major theme throughout Hilma's work. In fact, this business of the blue and the blue is representing the feminine, and the yellow is representing the masculine, um, and that appears throughout a lot of these larger scale pieces also. I mean, she did endless notes and endless diaries. There are something along the lines of 27,000 pages in these books that she did. There are crates and crates of them. One of the reasons why art historians are going so crazy over her work is there's so much available to them to interpret, that has been laying fallow. There's a foundation that's set up for her work and safeguards her work at this point. Um, it is miraculous that it lasted as intact as it is at this stage of the game. Okay, and this is Anna Casal. This is a a portrait, and these are a couple of her pieces. So you can see that there is a parallel path between the two of them. Um, though the mark making, even in that background in her pieces, is a bit different from the mark making that you can see, um, in some of the large scale pieces. So it's it's questionable whether she actually physically painted on the large scale paintings, though I know that the drawing, the design work came out of Hilma for the large scale pieces. She would get inside the paintings with a long stick and charcoal at the end of it and draw inside those big pieces. Must have been fun to watch. Okay. In the later years of her career, Hilma left ambitious large scale projects behind and focused on albums and visual atlases painted using watercolor. Once again, she turned to botanical illustration, this time augmented by her spiritual and scientific knowledge. Starting from the 1920s, she worked actually 1919, but 1920s, she studied in the library at the headquarters of the anthro oh god, I'm not even going to do it. This was actually the a group that split off from theosophy. Rudolf Steiner, um, had some disputes with the kind of mediumistic aspect of Hilma's work, but also the kind of hierarchical aspects of theosophy. Um, Steiner, you may have heard that name. He actually was kind of behind the Walden School and behind, the Montessori, um, creative learning technique. Steiner was somebody that Hilma followed from an early time, like back in her college days. She was reading and going to lectures by Steiner, and she actually showed him her work in I believe it was in the 20s. Um, and again, he had problems with this business of acting as a medium for something else to come through. He was very much into the idea of tuning into the creative force, but it being an individual's, um, right and power to bring that through, and that each of us had something unique to contribute. Um, so anyway, Hilma gave lectures on her spiritual explorations in her art. Hilma's early illustrations made a surprising comeback in this later work, with precise copied images of flowers, mosses, and tree leaves appearing on pages of her notebooks again. This time, however, precise and detailed drawings were accompanied by small square diagrams reflecting the energetic field of a plant and its position in the spiritual world. These works were not artistic in their nature, but rather explorative. They're basically, she's using this as a way to grapple with the invisible life force that's in these plants. She believed these were energies invisible to the human eye, but not necessarily to her. Okay, here's one of her notebooks from 19, I believe this was 1919. Yeah, 1919. Um, so this is the beginnings of her starting to grapple with this idea of the life force coming through. Uh, Okay. And again, here we have these charts and the diagrams um, depicting these energies in the plants. Oh, I can't receive any direct messages. If you want to send a message through, put it in the chat. Okay. Anyway, um, and I'm not sure what is going to be in this show, but these fabulous kind of abstracted flower pieces, untitled On Viewing of Flowers and Trees. These pieces are on rice paper. So you get a very different feel for the watercolor. It kind of bleeds and reticulates in a very different way than what happens when you put watercolor on a piece of cotton or wood pulp paper. They're really lovely pieces, though. Um, Again, these. Let me see if I can blow these up a little bit. Nah, I don't seem to be able to find my little thing to pull up the zoom at this point. But we're going to get to see some of these in person if you get to the museum. They're also doing a catalog for this show. It won't be out till the end of May. So this whole series is on viewing of flowers and trees. Oh, there we go. Okay. So uh this work was not seen uh, um, basically one of the myths about Hilma is that she didn't want it to be seen. Well, that's actually not true. She did try to get the work seen. And in fact, she had a series of the temple pieces in London at um, a gathering of the Theosophical Society there, where there were lectures going on, and she had an exhibit of a large group of them, though there was not much feedback that she got out of that. Um, and she actually continued to try and get this temple built throughout her life, but really didn't manage to get anywhere with it. And by the end of her life, she told her nephew to lock them away, that 20 years from now, these paintings may be able to be seen and understood, but they're not, there's not an audience for them now. And nobody really understands what they're about. So they were in boxes for a very long time. Um, we can appreciate them for the energy that they bring to us at this stage and the compositional force of them. It's quite remarkable to stand in front of one of those big paintings. I'm really looking forward to getting to do some close observation on these botanical pieces. And again, scratching my head, trying to figure out what's going on here. So we are going to show Beyond the Visible, a documentary on Hilma af Klint at the library. And we don't have the date fixed yet, but I believe it's either Wednesday, June the 18th, or the 25th. I'll have more about that when, I do my next talk. Um, so you can also check back on the website. This film is actually available. Plus, there was a another film that was made about her life that's on Canopy that you can watch for free. Um, so if anybody has any questions at this stage of the game, let me have it. Otherwise, I will be there for the film. So my brain is still full of a lot of information that didn't come out in this talk. So I guess that's it. And hopefully I'll see you in a couple of weeks.